Thomas Hatch can share his, and while we do that, I will introduce him. So Thomas Hatch is the operations manager for Stable Accounts, which is the nation's largest and most used ABLE program. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and a Master of Science in Business Administration, both from San Diego State University. He began his career as a personal financial planner, but later moved to Ohio and transitioned to higher education, where he spent 17 years administering financial programs for the Ohio State University. Thomas joined Ohio's Treasurer's Office in August of 2017 to assist with the rapid expansion of the Stable Account program. So Thomas, welcome to our webinar, and we're looking forward to what you have to share with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate you inviting us to come and present to your group tonight. There's nothing we find more exciting than sharing with everybody around this great state of ours about this program and the benefits that can be reaped from this program. And we'll definitely go over a lot of information in the amount of time. So I would say don't worry about taking too many rapid fire notes. Definitely this presentation, as was mentioned, plus the PowerPoint that I'm using will be available after. So we'll do our best to get through this information, and hopefully you've at least heard about Stable Account, and we'll go through the particulars about how this account functions and operates, and what it can do for you if it seems like it's a good option for you and your family. I do want to mention that I am a part of the Treasurer's Office, your current State Treasurer, Robert Sprague, and we're grateful that we have the chance to administer and bring you this program. So to start, we want to start really at the beginning and talk about what is ABLE. So the word ABLE is an acronym standing for Achieving a Better Life Experience. This was the name of a federal piece of legislation passed in late 2014, which created an opportunity for individuals with disabilities to create a special account, a savings and investment account that they could put money into. And the biggest key, and if there's anything that in all of this I want you to remember out of the whole presentation, is this point, and this is the key, is that these accounts, you can save money without impacting eligibility for certain means-tested benefits. Means-tested is kind of a technical term. It just basically means any benefits in which they look at what you own, your assets, primarily, as is mentioned on the screen, SSI and Medicaid. Those programs will not look at anything in this account as an asset when determining eligibility for their benefit programs. And this is a game changer when it first came out, because most of you are quite aware, I'm sure, that the amount of things an individual can own with disabilities, roughly $2,000 worth, is all that they've ever really been allowed to have. And now this gives you a place where you can put excess monies to be used potentially later without impacting those benefits. So with that, we like to describe the ABLE account as a hybrid of three different kinds of things that you might be familiar with. So it's similar to like a 529 college savings plan in that it's a specific account that you can put funds and use them for a particular purpose. Now, we'll describe that this is a much broader purpose than the college savings account, but it actually falls under the same code section in the IRS regulations. So it's kind of like a sister to the college savings accounts when they put this legislation together. It's like a checking account because you don't just put your money in there and park it forever. If you so choose, it can be very transactional. You can put money in, you can take money out and spend it at any point in time for needs that you have, including being able to send checks from this account, which we'll describe later. And it's similar to a special needs trust in the fact that it is a protected account, such as we mentioned before, that your benefits that are related to assets that you're holding will not be affected by anything that falls within this account. And so that's kind of a general overview of what ABLE is. So the next question then is, well, what is stable or stable account? Well, simply put, stable account is Ohio's named ABLE program. So it's essentially Ohio's ABLE plan is called stable account. Stable is a national ABLE plan. So again, similar to the college savings, some of you might be familiar that states can set up a plan and anybody from any state can join that plan if they so choose. That is the type of plan we have. And we do have participants in this plan from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. It is administered as previously by the Ohio Treasurer's Office. We launched June 1st of 2016, so we're just over 6 years old. And we were the first program to launch and be available. And we are the most used ABLE plan in America, currently sitting with over a total of 30,000 accounts. And just for the state of Ohio, over 12,000 accounts just in the state of Ohio, which is by far more than any other state. And we're at this point over $270 million in money that are in those accounts being saved for later and in some cases invested to be used for needs that these individuals have. And one of the things we like to mention in relationship to that, and numbers are what they are, and we're proud of the progress we've made. But in particular, what we're proud of is that each of those dollars that's in these accounts are a dollar saved and potentially not spent down or wasted on things that maybe not be needed and are now going to be made available in the future for whatever that individual with a disability needs at that time. So let's go into a little bit more about how these accounts operate, what some of their rules are. We'll do that by first starting about what are some of the benefits. So we have 3 listed here. There's much more than just 3. But the first is ownership. So the account is owned by the individual with the disability. When you apply and enroll in the account, their name and social security number will be used on the account, and they are the owner. Everything in that account belongs to them. Financial independence. We just talked about eliminating spend down. For us, we jokingly in our office call that a bad word. We don't like the word spend down. We would rather see people save and use the money when and how they want and not feel like they have to use it just simply to try to keep their benefits. So we eliminate that and increase the amount of short and long-term savings that you can have. And then tax benefits. There are a couple different tax benefits. One of them just happens to be that any of the monies in the account, including any earnings, can be spent out of the account tax-free. But there's also another benefit for state of Ohio residents where any monies contributed to the account in the state of Ohio can qualify for a state income tax deduction on your state tax return. That can be up to $4,000 per individual that is contributed to an account with unlimited rollover. So if you have contributed more than $4,000, then you could use up to that amount in 1 year, and then the rest you can use in future years without that benefit going away. So if that is something important to you, that's a great benefit to have. How about eligibility? This is one that we wish we had a little bit more control over, but this is how the federal law was written. So I will first start by mentioning that on our website, stableaccount.com, we have an eligibility quiz. If you want to go on there and look at that, it's a convenient tool that will take you through some yes and no and other types of answers that can help you figure out if you qualify for this type of account. And I'll also mention in general that our website is a great resource for a lot of other things. So we're not going to be able to cover all information here tonight, and our website is a great resource to find additional information or further detail on the information that we're discussing here tonight. But here's the basics for eligibility. An individual with a disability has to have that occur prior to the age of 26. Now, the key here is that the onset had to start prior to 26. That does not mean that the individual enrolling the account has to be younger than 26. They can be any age, just as long as there is evidence that their disability began prior to the age of 26. Believe it or not, our oldest participant in the plan is over 90 years old. Her disability she had from birth, but just happened to see this account become available when she was much, much older, liked the concept, and so she enrolled with us and still qualified because she had evidence that she had had her particular disability from birth. But besides the age restriction, there is also one other requirement. So you have to have one of the two following things apply. Actually, it's three. And that would be that you're eligible to receive SSI or SSDI due to disability. And the key here is eligible. If you have not applied for those benefits, but you are eligible for those benefits, that is a qualifying condition. Obviously, if you're receiving them, you automatically qualify under that condition. There is also something called a condition or a list of compassionate allowances conditions on the Social Security Administration's website. If you have any of the conditions listed on that list, that is a qualifying condition. I will say it's a pretty exhaustive list. If you want a link to get to that list more easily, you can go to our website, as mentioned before, at stableaccount.com, go to our eligibility section, and we have a link there to that section of the Social Security Administration's website to look up that list of conditions. And then the third is self-certification. So we'll go into a little bit further detail about that. So what is self-certification? This would be an individual who goes to a qualified medical professional, and that medical professional will diagnose them as having a mental impairment, physical or mental, that causes marked and severe functional limitations, and a condition has lasted or is expected to last at least 1 year. We do make forms available on our website that can be taken to a physician for them to fill out to meet this requirement. But the bigger item here is that if this is a qualifying circumstance for you, and that's what you want to use when you're enrolling to specify that you're self-certifying, you do not need to actually turn that written diagnosis into us when you apply, but we suggest and recommend that you keep it on hand in case you're ever asked for it. To this point, no federal agency or state agency has ever asked anybody to prove their diagnosis for them, but it's always best practice to keep that on hand should that actually happen. Next, how about enrollment? So the I would say easiest and probably best way to enroll is online. It is free at stableaccount.com. When you go to the homepage of our website, in the upper bar or corner of the website, you'll see a enroll button. You click that button and that will take you through some screens to a vendor that we utilize to go through and open up an account. It's really quick and easy. We say it takes approximately 20 minutes. Some people will do it faster. Some people maybe take a little bit longer depending on circumstances, but it's really not a very long and complicated process. There is a $25 minimum opening deposit. That is not a fee, but just simply creates a balance in the account. And that deposit can be made in a couple different ways, which we'll highlight in just a moment. I will mention that our preference is that you enroll online because this is a mostly online managed program, meaning that when you go to manage the account after it's open, it's in an online format. But if necessary, we do have paper application forms available. They would be on our website under our forms section. And you can go there. It is a fillable PDF form. You can fill it all out, mail it in per the instructions on the first page, and you can open an account that way. So who can enroll? So there's really two separations here. First of all, the individual with a disability who we'd call the account holder, can enroll in their own account. This would be somebody that's over the age of 18 and has the capacity and desire to want to manage their own account. Now, if they're under the age of 18, or they don't have the capacity or the desire to want to manage their own account, there can be a designated person to do that for them. Our term is ALR for short. That's an acronym for Authorized Legal Representative. So in this program, an authorized legal representative can open and manage the account on behalf of that individual with the disability. On the right side of this slide, you'll see the various individuals who qualify under federal legislation to play that role of authorized legal representative. They are in a particular order as designated by the Internal Revenue Service. And here they are: being an agent under a power of attorney, a conservator or legal guardian, a spouse, parent, sibling, grandparent, or a Social Security representative payee, or rep payee for short. That order is structured in this particular way, as stated in the rules, because essentially from the top of the list down, that's the priority in which somebody has of filling that role should they want to. So for example, if a power of attorney exists and the person with that wants to manage, then they supersede all other people on the list, even if somebody else on the list wants that privilege as well. I will also say that the individual with a disability, assuming they have capacity to designate, can designate somebody, which is the highest of all priorities here. They can go to somebody and say, I would like you to manage this account for me, and that would be fine, even if that person is not one of these people on this list. So lots of different questions there. If an authorized legal representative is there, then they will have to fill out a portion of the enrollment with some personal information, letting us know who they are and what their capacity is in managing this account. How about funding your account? As I mentioned before, there's really two primary ways, possibly a third that we have listed there. The first is through an electronic funds transfer. That would be simply attaching an existing checking or savings account at your personal bank to the stable account and moving money electronically from your bank account to the stable account. That's you can set that up during enrollment, or you can set it up after. Either way is fine. You can fund it through a check, through a paper check. That can be sent in after the fact. That can be sent in with a paper application. And that is another viable way. The last one we have on here is not necessarily done to get the account open and started, but we wanted to highlight it as a way that you can put money in the account, and that is through payroll deduction. So this would be for those that are employed, setting this up with your employer to have a portion of your earnings on each paycheck, or however, whatever interval you want that done, sent directly to this particular stable account. And we have documents and instructions on how to set that up. Next, how much can you put in the account? So there's 3 limits here. We're going to go over each of them in more detail here in just a second, but there's one limit for everybody if you're not employed, a different limit if you are employed, and this happens to mean the individual with a disability, and there's a lifetime limit. So let's go through each of those one at a time. So if the individual is not employed, and this would be a limit for everybody, no matter what, you can put up to $16,000 per year into this account. When we say here from all sources, that can be your own monies, that can be from parents, friends, siblings, employers. You can actually roll over money or move money from a college savings plan into this up to that $16,000 limit per year. There are so many sources and options. As long as it's cash, that can be put into this up to that limit each year. Now, if the individual is employed, which is super great and awesome, they can actually have a slightly higher limit up to a maximum of $28,880. So what that represents is the $16,000 that we previously talked about, plus wages up to an additional $12,880. So if they wanted to take some of their own earnings from their employment and put those in the account, they can actually designate those separately, kind of fill up this work limit bucket along with the 16,000 and contribute beyond that $16,000 limit. The final one, which probably isn't super relevant, but we'll mention it here because it's part of the rules, is that there is a lifetime limit of $517,000. Now that sounds like a gigantic amount of money, and I would assume that most accounts probably aren't going to get to that limit, because we'll talk a little bit later about, we'll call it an artificial secondary limit that are probably going to have people not getting that high. Plus it would take a long time and good earnings and investment markets to get up to that limit. But it is part of the plan. All that this means is that if the balance on your account got that high, you would no longer be able to contribute, but you could still earn interest and dividends and gains from market investment markets on that account. One other way that you can receive contributions from other people is through gifting. So we have a unique gifting feature with this plan. Once the account is open and you log in for your very first time, when you get to the overview page of your account online, it's kind of like a little tile format. You have these little tiles that are each represent different things. And one of those tiles, you can set up a gifting page. So once this gifting page is set up through a few steps, not very difficult to do, it will create a unique link that you can send through email, you can post on social media, any way that you want to get that link to other people. And they simply click on that link, it takes them to a secure site where they can make contributions through either a direct transfer from their bank account or using a debit card. And that is a great way in particular for holidays, graduations, other special occasions where they may want to give the individual a gift, but there might be concerns about, could that gift, depending on how large it is, impact my benefits. And so this is a way to give the gift directly to their account, so they still own it and it's still there, but they're not worrying about what to do with the monies that they're receiving in case that could potentially create a problem. All right, how about savings and or investing? What can you do with the money once it's in the account? So this is probably one of the more unique things, definitely, that individuals here may not have had the opportunity to do much of in the past. And that is that you have the opportunity to save and or invest the money in this account. So if you look at the left side of this, the all gray circle called BankSafe, that is our cash option. That's basically like a super savings account. It's safe, it's FDIC insured, you will not lose money or value in it. And actually, because of where interest rates have gone in this country, that particular account is starting to earn some pretty reasonable returns. We're up to about 3% right now on that particular cash account, which, if any of you have ever looked at a personal checking or savings at a bank, probably not getting that good of a return on that account. The other options, there's 4 of them, are all a mix of stocks and bonds. These are all Vanguard mutual funds. Vanguard, one of the largest, most highly respected mutual fund companies in our country. And it's a mixture of stocks and bonds, from income, which is more conservative, a lot more bonds, less stocks, all the way up to growth, which is a lot more stocks and less bonds. So a lot of information out on our website that describes those more, gives you more information about those, risks to consider, things to consider. But those are all options that you have at your disposal when you look at how you want to try to potentially grow these funds for future use. Next, how can we spend the funds? So once we put the funds in, how can we spend them and what can we spend it on? So we'll start first by, what can you spend it on? And this is probably one of the questions we get the most specific questions from participants about. So let me basically describe it to you this way. As long as the money is used for the individual with a disability, the definition is so broad that there's probably not too many things that you couldn't spend the money on. And here's what the technical definition is. So the rule says that, again, the money must be spent on the individual with a disability, and this is the key phrase, must help maintain or improve their health, independence, or quality of life. And that's it. I know the Social Security Administration and others have at times put out a list. It's not an exhaustive list, but it just as an example of different types of things. Some of those are highlighted here: housing and rent, basic living expenses, transportation, assistive technology, health and wellness. Again, basically, you dream it up as long as it's legal and as long as it's for the benefit of the individual with a disability. Likely it is a qualified expense. And the important thing about being qualified is those expenses then being qualified makes it so that anything spent out of the account is not taxable. So that's the reason for the qualification. If it's not qualified, then there could be some other tax consequences, but it's very rare that I think we'd ever run into that once people understand really how much they can use, and all the different purposes that they could use this for. And we have some really unique stories. If I had more time, I'd love to share more of them on how people have used these accounts. Maybe I'll share one because it was the first one, I think, in the nation that we heard about to ever do that. And that was a couple in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is actually a state that partners with us and utilizes our program to market to their state. And we had a couple there. Both of them were eligible. They were married. And so right from the very beginning of the program, they each opened up their own separate account and made a goal and a plan to consistently put money in that over time, as much as they could afford, and really build that up. And it was pre-COVID, so probably a couple years ago. They had saved up enough where they're able to jointly pull funds out and put a down payment on their own house. And it was one of the coolest things ever. To hear their story, to see them, out in front of their home with the sold sign, holding it up for pictures, and to see them be able to do something like this that they probably could have never dreamed of doing potentially with their own funds and their own means. But because they had the chance and ability to save over time, that option became available to them. So it was one of the great stories we like to talk about. Next, how can you spend from the account? So there's really three primary ways. We've kind of listed these in order of how we like to talk about them in relationship to documentation. So documentation is important oftentimes. So the first one is checking and savings. This would be that if you have a checking or savings account attached to the stable account that you've used to contribute funds, you can go the other direction and withdraw funds from the stable account back to that checking or savings account. Now, the good news is pretty fast and pretty easy. Take a few days, money moves electronically back to your checking or savings account. Then if you have a debit card attached or a checkbook or whatever else, you can utilize it just like you would your checking or savings account. The bad news is, from a documentation standpoint, once it leaves a stable account, you have to keep track of how much is there, how much is able funds or stable funds, and how you're spending those funds. So not a lot of documentation that our system can provide. It would be up to you to provide most of that. The middle box is what we call a third-party check. So one of the features we have in this program is, from your account online, you can have them cut a check and send it to whoever you want to, typically to pay a bill. We find this most convenient oftentimes for individuals paying rent or maybe a mortgage payment, where they will put in their landlord or the company and the dollar amount, and the system will send a check to that to pay that particular bill. Now, the good thing about this from a documentation standpoint is that the system records that a check's being sent, who it's being sent to, and what the dollar amount is. And that's a permanent record in your account, so that you always have evidence of what happened with that transaction. Now, if you want the one spending vehicle where you can get the most documentation and some other unique features, that would be the stable Visa card. So we utilize an outside vendor. For those that have been in the industry for a while, you may have heard the name TrueLink. They're actually based on the West Coast, but are a very prominent card issuer in this space. We utilize their product, and you can then, if you sign up for the card, receive a Visa card personally. It is a loadable card, and I'll go to the next page to show you what it looks like and a little bit more about it. But with the loadable card, you put on it however much funds that you want, and then that's all that can be spent on the card. So the card's value is only worth how much money is transferred onto it. But it does provide great control and access to the funds. There's no overdrafts, no cash access. You can even limit merchant types of various kinds of expenses. There are some online recording features, so similar to a normal debit card. As soon as you spend at a store, the transaction will appear of, what store it was spent at, how much was spent there. You can also log in and record notes, attach receipts, all kinds of really cool stuff to document how you're using the funds on that card. This card does come to you at no cost via an arrangement that we have with the vendor. There is a couple minor things if you look at their agreement, but I think the only cost really is if you use it internationally, there could be a cost. But if you use it within the United States, free to use and free to get, and can be a great convenient way to spend, and a great financial tool for those that want to learn more financial responsibility. All right, we mentioned before that there is some considerations with SSI, this first point in particular, that we want to keep in mind. So we mentioned the lifetime maximum limit, $517,000. The Social Security Administration does have another rule, and that rule is that if an individual is receiving SSI benefits, that any balance in this account over $100,000 counts as a resource. Now, the good news is it doesn't disqualify you from SSI. It just merely suspends your benefits, not terminates them, but suspends them. And then if there's any point in time in which you spend the account down, I know that's not a good term, but you use funds in the account for purposes you want, and the account balance goes below 100,000, you can then become eligible again to receive the full SSI benefits. But that is what we call kind of a soft cap. So definitely individuals on those benefits may want to consider not going above that dollar amount. Still a very large dollar amount, I'm sure, for us to consider, but that is there. And we do have, by the way, a number of accounts in this program currently over that amount of money per account. So it is possible to get there. Also, one other consideration from the Social Security Administration, if you take out money from this account that you're intending to spend on housing expenditures, primarily, again, rent, mortgage payment, or so forth, if it's withdrawn and you hold those funds in your account, but you don't use them until the following month, then they can be counted as a resource in the month that you withdrew them. A very odd rule. We didn't make this up, and it's one that we wish wasn't there. But it is a consideration to remember. It really only applies to housing expenditure. So any other one is fine. We just recommend that if you are withdrawing money for housing, maybe send it directly through that third-party check, or just make sure that you expense it and spend it in the month that you withdraw it. And then the other one as well, and this actually goes for all benefit programs, not just SSI, but account holders' own wages still count as income, even if they contribute it to a stable account. So this is one really important thing to remember, and that is a stable account protects you from rules from the benefit agency about assets, about what you own. It does not protect you from any income limits that benefit may have. So SSI is an example where they have an asset or means tested or resource limit, and they have an income limit. So if you are working and earning income, that income could potentially cause you to reduce and or potentially receive nothing from SSI, depending on how much you're making. This account, even if you directly contribute your income to the stable account, will not keep you from that being counted as income and potentially affecting your benefits in that way. So an important point to remember there. Next, not one that we like to talk about, but one we feel that we need to. What happens if an account holder passes away? So we'll go through this rather quickly, but the basic thought is that just like anybody else, this is an account that they own that's in their name, and so it would be subject to similar type of post-death estate things that anybody else would be. You'd have a state administrator who can take over the account. If the account holder doesn't have a will or has a will, it's going to go through the normal probate processes. Sometimes this may be all that they do own, and so there may even be the possibility that the probate process wouldn't even really come into play. But this next slide is probably the more important one that we want you to understand. Again, not that we like to talk about it, but it is a part of the program and we want to make sure you understand. And that is that Medicaid, if that is a benefit being received, can ask for payback from this account in some cases for Medicaid services provided. Now, your account is a little bit more protected than other types of accounts from this standpoint. Before Medicaid can come in and look at the account, any outstanding expenses can be paid. Funeral and burial expenses can be paid. You know, you can deduct Medicaid buy-in premiums. There's a variety of ways that you can use the money before Medicaid can come back and look at it. The other one to remember as well is that in this account specifically, Medicaid cannot look back over the lifetime of the individual. They can only look back from the time that they opened their stable account to the time that they passed away. Now, granted, I'll have to tell you, as the operational arm of this program, I have dealt with many individuals so far across the country who have passed away, and in all the states in which they want to claim Medicaid recovery, it's been very rare, if at all, that Medicaid has not come in and generally taken the balance of the account after all of those other expenses have been paid. So one of the things we like to joke about is if a prepaid funeral plan has not been already arranged, then maybe have the most elaborate you know, funeral and burial that you can possibly have. Find ways to use the funds if that's something you know, that makes sense. But did want to make sure to know that state of Ohio is a particular state that that does do Medicaid recovery. It actually runs through our Attorney General's office, and so you have to keep in mind that that is a possibility. Final, to kind of come down to a couple concluding slides here. What does it cost to have these types of accounts? There are fees included. We do have a lower fee for Ohio residents than we do for all other states because we're willing to subsidize you through earnings that we have. So currently, Ohio residents do have what amounts to a $2.25 per month fee that's charged quarterly at $6.75 $6.75 quarterly. That is charged to the account. We are working over time as much as possible to bring that number down and maybe even possibly try to eliminate it here going forward at some point in the future. But presently, that is the fee that is charged. There is also an asset-based fee. This one's a little bit, if you haven't worked around investments, this one's a little bit harder to understand because it's 0.19% to 0.33%. That range is dependent on what investment option you choose, and it's not a fee that you'll ever see. So the fee is being charged, but it won't show up in your account. You won't have a line in there saying asset fee and show a dollar amount. The way that investment companies do this is they adjust the price of your investments to pull their fee out of that. And so it's really kind of like it just reduces your investment earnings and doesn't really show up in your account as an actual fee line with dollar amount next to it. So just wanted to kind of explain that. These, by the way, those asset-based fees are the lowest in the nation for any program. So not too bad at all. And Vanguard happens to be a very low-cost mutual fund company. All right, one final thing before we look at wrapping up, and that is, and I'm not sure if our next guest will get into this or not at all. I think he's talking more about signing up for benefits, but what about special needs trusts? How can maybe these two items work together? What are some differences? What are some similarities? So with a special needs trust, we like to look at these as being tools that can work together very, very well. So if you know somebody that already has a trust set up, that's fine. A stable account may or may not be an additional useful tool for them. But here's a couple things to consider. So trusts can make distributions to a stable account. And the one feature we find the most useful is, or that we hear a lot, is that a trust is great for protecting the assets of an individual, but sometimes it's very difficult to spend from, because a lot of times you have to make the request to the trustee, you have to specify what you're going to be spending the money on, specific dollar amount, maybe it takes longer, it's cumbersome, and so forth. Well, in a stable account, there's none of that. Once the money's there, you write checks, you transfer to your bank account, you use a debit card, you have all of these options, and you actually have a broader spending because whether you know this or not, certain items like housing and food are not a qualified or applicable expense out of a trust, but you can use your stable account for those items. So what we see a lot is individuals that will open a stable account and use that in connection with their trust as their spending vehicle. So they will annually transfer money from their trust to their stable account and then use their stable account to spend when they need to spend. Trust can accept unlimited cash and non-cash assets, which is something that a stable account cannot do, as we've already discussed the limits. So I would say if there's a circumstance where there's a settlement from a lawsuit, inheritance, life insurance policy that's of a reasonable size, a number of those things, obviously a trust would probably be more applicable to hold all of that. But then maybe a stable account becomes a benefit as a spending tool, as previously mentioned. Stable accounts do have a state tax deduction for contributions, which a trust doesn't. No federal or state income tax on their earnings when spent on qualified expense, which a trust doesn't have. And it can be established and administered by the individual with a disability, where obviously in a trust, you need a trustee, and even the time and expense of setting up the trust, which can be a little bit more expensive at times. This has no fee to set it up, quick and easy. So just consider those as things. We're big fans of special needs trusts. We by no means want to suggest that they're not a useful tool, but we think that a stable account can work well in connection with a trust. All right, here's some final information for you. Here's some applicable things. We do have a customer service line that supports our program. The number's there on the screen, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., pretty good hours. We also have a team@stableaccount.com, which is an email address for general purposes that you can email to and get feedback. And there's our web address at stableaccount.com, which is a great resource for finding out further information, finding forms, and also when you want to go and open an account, that's where you'd go to and click on the enroll link, and that will take you out to open an account. So that's a very quick basic overview of the stable account program. I know it looks like I can't see the questions in the chat, but at least there looks like there are some questions in the chat. So I can turn it back to Stephanie to see if she wants to go through some of those questions. More than happy to stay as long as you would like me to answer some of those, obviously wanting to make some time for our other presenter as well. So at this point, I will stop sharing, send the screen back to Stephanie, but let's answer some questions here before we go on to the next part of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Thomas. We do have questions to Michael Liner. He is honored to have the opportunity to present disabled individuals across the United States before the Social Security Administration. Michael became a disability attorney because he knows what it's like to be different. As a child growing up in the Detroit area, he attended a special school for children with attention and behavior problems. His behavior problems were so severe, in fact, that he was ultimately expelled from that special school. Michael also dealt with a range of neurological disorders, including epilepsy and motor tic syndrome. When choosing a career path, it was important for Michael to find a field where he could help people going through experiences like his own as a child. Michael founded Liner Legal in 2013 and is proud to have been selected by his peers as one of the top Social Security disability lawyers in Ohio under the age of 40. He has successfully represented thousands of claimants seeking Social Security disability benefits at all stages of litigation, from initial applications up through the federal district court level. So, Michael, welcome. We're happy to have you here. And if you'd like to share your screen, you can go ahead and do so.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I will do exactly that just to make sure I'm audible. You can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your presentation. It's not in presentation mode yet, but we can certainly see it.
There we
Great.
go. Yeah, so thank you so much for that introduction. And a lot of this was already covered, so I'm not going to repeat too much, but little bit about me. I am an attorney who helps people get disability benefits. I think maybe we're going in a strange order with the presentations this evening. We were talking a little bit more earlier about the stable accounts, which usually those end up being formed after somebody has received disability benefits, or SSI benefits. But I'm going to talk about the process of acquiring them and also maintaining them, because I think that what you'll find is that a lot of the many of the things that are important to being awarded benefits in the first place are the same things that it takes to acquire disability benefits originally and to preserve them. So few things that we're going to cover this evening, and I think we probably have about a half an hour, so I may fly through some of this because I definitely want to leave time for your questions and meet your needs where you're at. But I'm going to talk about what is Social Security disability, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what qualifies for disability benefits. I'm going to talk about a difference between the types of benefits. When we're talking about stable accounts, that involves SSI benefits, but I'm going to introduce the other type of disability benefit, SSD benefits, and describe what the differences are. And then I'm going to talk about what are the things that are important to winning a disability case. So just to kind of start us off, I'm going to read this, but I'm really going to hone in on the parts of it that I think are important and explain the different components of this definition. So to be awarded Social Security disability, regardless of which type of disability benefit you're applying for, you need to meet the requirements of this definition. But essentially, Social Security disability, it's a government benefit provided by the Social Security Administration for individuals who are unable to engage in any substantial gainful activity. That's the first part of this definition. And then I'm going to come back to that in a minute and explain the different parts here. But that's part one. By reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment. That's part two of the definition. And part three is which can be expected to result in death, or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. So in a disability claim, whether you're applying for SSI benefits or SSD benefits, which I'm going to go, get further into the weeds and explain the differences between those in a moment here, you need to meet all three parts of this. Disability, the first part is SGA. What we have to demonstrate is that you are unable to and have not been working at what's called substantial gainful activity. That is earning an income from work activity, any type of work activity. But SGA is really an amount of money. And so it changes every year. There's a cost of living adjustment. But in this year, 2022, SGA is $1,350. So what we're looking at, you have to have not been earning and be unable to earn at or greater than $1,350 per month. That is not a net number. It's a gross number, which is really important. And I want to explain some things further about this. A lot of times, we'll have people who say, well, by the time, I'm working, but by the time that they take out taxes or the medical insurance that I have to pay for, I'm below $1,350 a month, even though my gross earnings that show on the paycheck is $2,000 per month. Social Security is only concerned with the gross number, not with how much you're actually netting of your pay. Okay. And The other thing that's really important to understand, and especially when somebody, is applying for disability or receiving disability, it doesn't matter how many hours you work to receive that amount, okay? If you did 1 hour of work per month, consistently every month, but were paid $2,000 per hour, so $2,000 for 1 hour of work each month, you would be engaging in substantial gainful activity. It's hard to believe that, to think that 1 hour of work could be enough to make you ineligible for disability benefits. And that's, kind of a drastic example. It's also hard to imagine, what type of work somebody would be doing that they would be paid $2,000 for 1 hour of work. But I throw out that example to help you understand that it's not about, whether it's not a number of hours. Sometimes people will say, well, if I'm working full time, if I just drop it down to 20 hours, then I can apply for or receive disability. Not unless your earnings are below $1,350 a month gross. Okay, so that's part one of the definition here. And then by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment. I think that's kind of self-explanatory, but what the point that I want to get across is, and I'll make a secondary point, is you can receive disability for both physical and mental illness, and a combination. And I think that's really important, because oftentimes people will reach out to me and they'll say, I'm applying for disability because of, a neurological disorder that I've had since birth. And I think that just based on their conversation, that's the only medical issue they have. But then when I get into the records, I see that they have a lifelong learning disorder, they have a back problem, and other medical issues. It's really important. Here's kind of a tip for everybody, that when you are applying for disability or you're going through the redetermination process, which happens periodically, that you list every single medical condition that you have and don't just focus on one thing. And the reason is because every little limitation adds up into what Social Security calls residual functional capacity. They try to determine what people can or cannot do based on their physical and mental impairments. And, one of your impairments by itself may not necessarily qualify for disability. But if in combination, if it's, a combination of the neurological disorder that somebody has, maybe they have, a seizure disorder, but the seizures, don't have a frequency enough that would warrant receiving benefits, but they also have a significant learning disorder that makes it so that they can only perform, simple tasks and at a slower pace. The combination of the limitations from the seizure disorder plus the learning disorder might be enough to prove that the person can't work at all, which is, or can't maintain SGA, which is what we have to prove. So I always tell people, kitchen sink, list every impairment that you want that you have and that Social Security should be considering. And then the final part here is the durational portion. The impairment that you're applying for, the impairments have to last at least 12 months or be expected to result in death. Where that becomes important, or where I see that showing up more, is when somebody becomes a problem, is when, for example, somebody has, say somebody breaks a leg or breaks their arm, and there may be a period of time where they're going through therapy, they're going through treatment, and because of all those issues they're unable to work. But with proper treatment, they would be able to return to work, at least in some capacity, maybe not the job they're doing, but they might be able to do some work in 4 months, 6 months, 8 months. If you are not unable to work for at least 12 months, you can't qualify for disability benefits. Or if you don't have a disability that is likely to result in, it's a terminal illness, result in death, you can't qualify for disability benefits. That durational requirement is really important. So I want to make sure that people understand that. Most of the, impairments that I think, if you're on this call, you're probably working with a loved one, or you yourself have an impairment that probably is lifelong or has existed for quite a while. So that's usually not going to be a problem with many mental impairments, for example, which, it's hard to imagine a mental impairment that from time of diagnosis would be in remission within 12 months. Usually, even with treatment, the impairment is still there, and we have to consider what limitations somebody has with treatment. But I'll continue. So I mentioned that there's two types of disability benefits. We were talking a lot about SSI earlier and the stable accounts that are tied with that. But there's another type of disability benefit, which is called Social Security Disability Insurance. And to kind of talk about the differences between the benefits, to receive SSDI benefits, you had to, generally speaking, and I'm going to be a little more specific with this slide. Generally, you have to have worked and paid into Social Security for 20 quarters of the previous 40 quarters, which breaks down generally to you have to have paid into Social Security through your taxes for 5 of the 10 years immediately prior to becoming disabled. Those numbers are less when somebody is 32 years old or below, because they wouldn't have had the opportunity to work and pay into Social Security that much. But what I want to point out, there's another program that falls under SSDI where somebody can receive disability benefits on the earnings record of a parent. Those are called DAC benefits, Disabled Adult Child Benefits. The name changed recently, a few years ago. It used to be known as CDIB benefits, so basically Child Disability Insurance Benefits. But now what Social Security is using in all their publications, they call them DAC benefits. DAC benefits are a disability insurance benefit, but instead of receiving disability benefits on the applicant's own work record, they are drawing it on the work record of their parent. In order to be eligible for DAC benefits, disability must be established before the age of 22. That's really important. So if somebody gets in a severe accident and they're, unable to work, but they're 24 years old, when that happens and that's their disability onset date, they would not be eligible to receive benefits on a parent's work record. It must be established before the age of 22 that the person was totally unable to work, unable to engage in SGA. And the triggering event, when someone can actually collect benefits on their work record, in addition to proving that they're disabled, is they have to have a parent who is either receiving Social Security retirement benefits, receiving Social Security disability benefits on their own record. So the parent doesn't necessarily have to be retirement age 65 or 66 now. They may be, only in their 50s, but they themselves are drawing Social Security disability benefits. So their child would be eligible to receive DAC benefits. Or the third triggering circumstance for DAC benefits is if one of the parents dies and is deceased. So there's 3 qualifying conditions in addition to demonstrating disability before the age of 22 for DAC benefits. But again, then the parents had to have worked and paid into Social Security. So we still do have the earnings requirement there. SSDI benefits come with Medicare, which is different than SSI benefits, which come with Medicaid. I'm not going to spend as much time going over the SSI piece because I think that I'm going to talk about the things that I think are important here, but I know a lot of this was covered in the prior presentation. If there's additional questions that I don't cover, please feel free to ask a question at the end. But while SSDI benefits receive Medicare, which is, of course, the health insurance that comes with Social Security retirement benefits, so it makes sense that would also come with Social Security disability benefits. SSI benefits come with Medicaid, which is provided through the local government. Okay. And then, of course, there's some differences in the payment amounts. With SSDI benefits, it's based on, and even the DAC benefits, it's based on how much the earning individual has worked and paid into Social Security and how much they were earning when they were working, because the more that they were earning, the more taxes they were paying. And if you apply for SSDI benefits, you can actually receive the benefits up to a year prior to the application. I'm going to talk about with the DAC benefits, because I think this is important for those watching this to understand. With DAC benefits, if you have a parent who is receiving Social Security benefits, either they're retired or they are receiving disability, the child's benefit is usually half of the benefit amount of the parent. When one of the parents is deceased, then that benefit amount is usually about 75% of the parent's benefit. So that's kind of important to know, because the law presumes, whether this is true or not, but this is the purpose behind it, that while the parents are alive and that they're in some context assisting their children, the reality is we're still talking about adult children here, and many of them are living on their own and not actually being supported by their parent. But at least when the parent is deceased, the disabled adult child will receive additional benefits beyond what they're receiving, when their parent is retired or receiving Social Security disability benefits. The big difference in payment amounts here is that SSI benefits is fixed by statute. This year, the most that somebody can receive from SSI benefits is $841 per month. And another difference that I want to point out with the benefits for SSI is that back pay, when somebody who's applying for disability is actually eligible to receive it, isn't until the month after they've applied for SSI benefits. So if one of us were to walk into a Social Security office and apply for SSI benefits today, we wouldn't be eligible to receive a disability check until November of 2022, regardless of when we actually became disabled. However, if it can be proven that if you were applying for SSD benefits and you were able to demonstrate that you became disabled at least 12 months before the application, you could actually receive benefits before you've applied for them. So there's an important distinguishing factor between the two, and I'm happy to answer other questions about how they are different or similar. But I want to spend most of the remaining time that I have talking about what I think is crucial to receive disability benefits in the first place or to preserve them. Okay, so the first two that I have listed here, I really think that they go hand in hand, even though the points that I want to make from them are separate. In my experience of handling thousands of Social Security cases for either SSD or SSI benefits, the most important thing is that the applicant has a positive, successful relationship with their provider, with their treatment team, whether that's a medical doctor, a therapist, a social worker, a counselor, a physical therapist, whoever it is. The reason is people are not awarded disability benefits because of how they fill out any paperwork for Social Security. You're awarded or what you call and tell me, or one of my paralegals is wrong with you. People are awarded disability benefits because, and really only because, of what the treatment records say, whether that record is coming from the Board of Developmental Disabilities, whether it's coming from the doctors. That's what Social Security is going to be reviewing to determine eligibility for benefits. And if there is not a positive relationship with the provider where you go in there and you're able to explain how you're feeling and talk about things that are difficult for many people to talk about. Mental illness is challenging for people to sit down with somebody and open up about, especially if you have the additional barrier of not being comfortable with who it is that's helping you. The records are going to be deficient. And the worst thing that I ever see is when I'm working with a client who I know when I speak to them, they're crying to me and I can tell that they're being severe, but then I open up their records and I see boy, none of what you're telling me or how you're presenting with me in my office is consistent with what I'm reading. I use this phrase, the normal stamp. It seems like the doctor, nurse, or therapist brought out the normal stamp when they were documenting mental status, normal affect, normal conversation, normal level of depression or anxiety. But that's not because the individual wasn't experiencing those things, but because they didn't feel comfortable sharing it with the provider. So having that positive relationship with your treatment team is so important. Again, I was saying it goes hand in hand with what I have there. The ability to communicate your daily limitations to your treatment team is so important. And I want to offer a tip that I tell people a lot, because a lot of times, and I give the same tip to providers, to therapists, counselors, doctors, I like to tell people, when you're going to your appointments, it's natural for the provider to begin the conversation by saying, "How are you doing today?" Resist the urge to answer the question that way and say, "Oh, I'm fine today," or "I'm good, I'm well." It's almost uncomfortable in conversation for people to say things are not good, because it's just human psychology. People don't want to present in a negative way. If you are the patient, or you are the caretaker for somebody who is going through this process, when entering appointment, hear that question, "How are you doing?" not as how you are in that moment, but how you've been since the last time you had an appointment. Think back over the last week, think back over the last month or 3 months, because the answers are going to be very different. If you have mental illness and you are showing up to an appointment, usually it's a decent day. Because, when I'm representing people with severe mental illness, oftentimes I see a lot of no-shows in their records, and I ask why. Well, I couldn't get out of bed to make it to my appointment. Sometimes even with, the increased access to telehealth, I have clients that tell me I couldn't even, open a Zoom with my provider. But when the question is, "How are you now?" they're having a better day. Instead, "How have you been since the last time we met?" Because the answer you're going to get is very different. "Boy, there was a week where I was unable to get out of bed," or, "I'm trying to do a part-time job to see if I can work, and I just can't focus and concentrate and retain the information that they're training me. And I'm having conflict with my coworkers or my supervisor." The answers become very different. But when the question is, going back to the beginning here, when the question that's asked is, "How are you today?" it just kind of sets off a spiral of different questions. And you're forcing the doctor, counselor, therapist to play a game of pin the tail on the donkey. They have to ask questions to try to elicit information, which isn't necessarily easy. I always tell people, do not treat and go into your appointments with the mindset, "I need to tell them what it takes for my disability case," whether you're receiving benefits already or you're applying for them to begin with. Enter your appointments with the mindset of, "I need to give them the information that'll help them help me get better." Because the way that somebody gets better from communication with their providers is ultimately going to be the same way that they are providing the information that it takes to be successful with a disability case. If you want to get better, if improvement's what you're looking for, then you're going to be telling your treatment team about the struggles you were having at work, or the struggles you were even having getting out of bed. So really important that you are opening up and sharing everything that's going on in the window of time since you last had an appointment with your provider. I'll keep going down the line here to make sure, again, that we have time for questions. Conscientious form filling. I said something earlier that I'm going to come back to. I said people don't get approved for disability because of what they tell Social Security is wrong, either at a hearing or on any paperwork that Social Security sends, like a function report or a work history report. A lot of people think that they can describe their limitations in letters to Social Security in a way that will surely help them win their case. The reality is Social Security does not review that paperwork to approve cases. They review that paperwork to pick holes in someone's cases, okay? And you need to understand that. Now, do I sound pessimistic? Yes. But once again, like I said, I've handled thousands of these cases. And what I've learned from them is that the way that people fill out forms, which is often by giving too much information, not because you're, trying to, people say too much. They try to over describe their limitations, but then they inadvertently, make it sound like they're able to do their own independent grocery shopping, or they're able to do their own independent cooking. What you need to be doing is answering the forms that Social Security sends to you. Only answer the questions that they're asking. And when they might ask on the form a question like, do you cook? Do you clean? Do you do laundry? Don't see the answers that way, or don't respond to the questions that way. See it as though the question that they're asking is, how do your limitations impact your ability to cook? How does your disability impact your ability to clean? How does your disability impact your ability to do the laundry? Because all of a sudden, instead of just answering the yes and no questions that Social Security loves asking, do you prepare meals? That's literally the question that they ask on their form. Listen, pretty much everybody prepares a meal. For some people, that means they're pouring a bowl of cereal. It might mean that they're just heating up a television dinner. But that's still meal preparation. So oftentimes I see people just quickly check a yes box on a form, and instead they don't go on to describe, well, for me, meal preparation is that I, can only, pour myself a bowl of cereal, or when I'm cooking, I need to have a chair that's next to the stove because I can't stand long enough to prepare a meal. Or I can't cook anything on the stove because I'm too forgetful, and it's resulted in dangerous situations for my family. So understanding the purpose behind the forms that Social Security sends, which is not to approve someone, it's to deny someone and pick holes in their disability, is really important. Adhering to deadlines, also important. I think, it seems obvious, but a lot of times people don't realize that there's limited flexibility with the deadlines that Social Security has on the forms. For most denials that Social Security sends, you have 60 days to file an appeal. And I want to go back to that because, or I want to develop that a little bit further here, because a lot of times when people get denied for disability, the denial letter gives you options. It says that you can appeal, or you could file a new application. And what I see a lot of times is people just restarting the process over and over and over again. Instead of keeping their application moving forward and filing an appeal, they just try filing a new application. That's not the best thing to do. The best thing to do if you're denied medically for disability, there's very few exceptions to this. There are some, but very few, is to file an appeal. Because while, Social Security denies the vast majority of applications at the initial review, they approve a majority of applications at the third level, which is called a hearing request, where you make arguments to a judge for why you're disabled. And that's why there's attorneys who handle these cases, because eventually most people end up having to appear before a judge. But understanding the deadlines for filing those appeals, which is usually 60 days, is extremely important. There are other actions you may have to take in your case. I don't want you to think every deadline with Social Security 60 days, but pay attention to what they're sending you. The next piece that I want to talk about here is knowing what the definition of disability is for Social Security. Great example is, a lot of times I'll have people come into my office and they'll say, I'm receiving services now through the board, the Board of Developmental Disabilities, so I should be eligible to receive disability, right? No. I mean, let me say it that way. It's not an automatic entitlement. The Social Security Administration has their own unique definition for what qualifies somebody for these benefits. Everything, the ways that you prove that you're disabled link back to that first slide that I had where I walked you through the 3 pieces, but the requirements for receiving disability from Social Security are different than the requirements for receiving services through the Board of Developmental Disabilities or a disability bus pass from the RTA. And it's important that you understand that. Because a lot of times people give up and get frustrated when they think, I don't get this. I'm receiving benefits from this organization. Why is Social Security denying me? And they give up. Don't give up because of that. Just understand that you're comparing apples and oranges and keep moving forward with the process that's in front of you. The last piece that I have here before I'll stop to take questions from the audience is you need to understand that this is a process. Most cases that come into my office take about 1.5 years. Yes, about 30% of people who apply for disability benefits, both Social Security, disability, and SSI, about 30% of the applications are approved at the initial level. Even the initial review of a claim takes about 4 to 6 months right now. Okay. If your claim is denied, which 70% of them are, the first appeal that we file in Ohio is called a request for reconsideration. They only approve about 10% of those. So about 90% of people, if they're denied at the initial level, get denied again. So then you file another, and that reconsideration denial takes about 2 to 4 months, something in that range. If you get denied a second time, then you file another appeal, which is called the request for a hearing. I described that's when you present your arguments for why you're disabled to a judge. And that's where people have their best chance of being approved. I mentioned that the majority of people do get approved at a hearing. I'll tell you, in my office, we win 85% of the hearings that we attend, which isn't a number that I should put out publicly, but I'll be transparent with the group. The numbers that Social Security publishes are that slightly more than half of the people who attend a disability hearing get approved for disability benefits. And that's it's even higher when you consider the fact that of the claims at the hearing level, many of them are just dismissed because an appeal wasn't filed on time, or the person didn't show up to their hearing and they dismissed it. So a lot of the claims are dismissed. They're not denied medically by a judge. They're denied because the case is abandoned or the case wasn't moved forward properly. But even the wait time for a hearing adds another 6 to 8 months to a case. So when you add it all up, an average disability case takes about 1.5 years. Don't be discouraged by that. It's frustrating. It is discouraging. But when entering this process, understand that if you follow through, you follow the appeals, you keep telling your doctors all the things that are wrong, and you're filling out the paperwork, by answering how your limitations are affecting you day to day, you can be successful with these cases. It just takes time. So I've spoken from kind of a bird's eye view intentionally because I'm hoping that people have some questions that I can answer that are more pointed and address where you're at with this process, if there are any. So I will. Is there anything that I need to do to welcome you back in here?
No, nothing you have to do, Michael. But if anyone has any questions for Michael, you can put your questions in the chat. You can raise your hand.